Hey everyone, it's Balar, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you about when items first become available at the vendor. So, understanding when items can start appearing at the vendor is important from a leveling perspective, as it's going to give you a more consistent base as to understanding when you can get these items, how to use them, and why the vendor might not have something that you think it otherwise should. So, as a result, leveraging this system can be extremely advantageous because some of the best ways to get the items you need early is from the vendor because it's usually a consistent source to get those items versus just trying to find them on the floor. Moreover, there are also certain items that spawn from the vendor that are really important to help us enable builds or build choices about how we path through the tree. For example, you might need to get an attribute amulet because of your tree pathing or because of gems you want to use. So, knowing when these items can start appearing is vitally important to be able to have consistency from run to run to run. So, there are two rules involved in the generation of items from the vendor. So, the first rule is as follows. What appears at the vendor will always be one level higher than your character level up to a cap. Now, typically, this cap is limited by the highest area level zone in the act that you're in. So in Act 1, that's going to be the Cavern of Anger, which has a monster or area level of 13. As a result, that means I won't see items that are greater than eye level 13 at the vendor. Because here I am level 2, and as a result of the rule that I will see items that are one level greater than my character level, when I go to Tarklay here, all the items available will be eye level 3. And you can sort of see that here as I hover over things. Everything is item level 3. Now, with the vendor,
farewell.
The vendors will reset and generate new items every time your level changes. So, as a result of this, every time you level up, what's going to happen is that if I were to hit level 4 here, or level 3, excuse me, I would go from having item level 3 items to having item level 4 items. And the vendor would reset and have all item level 4 things. So that's sort of like the first big rule that affects things. Now, the second rule helps explain why sometimes the vendor system is a little bit unintuitive. And the best way to explain the second rule is as follows. The level on an item, like the required level to use an item, doesn't always correspond to when it can actually become available to drop or to be purchased. And so typically what you think is that, hey, look, I have the required level to use this item, but it's not showing up at the vendor. Well, what ends up happening is that there is a stat called drop level for all normal bases or white item bases. And unless you have a unique that has a specific drop level, which some do, what's going to happen is that base item, the normal base item, won't drop until you have some way of generating an item that has a minimum of that drop level. So, as I mentioned, you won't see drop level in game. If I do advanced statistics here, or advanced tooltip, what you'll see is there's nothing here that says drop level. So to understand what the drop level of an item is that we actually have to look to one of the outside sources that we use, such as the wiki or poedb. Now, if I go to PoE wiki, what you'll see when I look at an item here, we'll take a plate vest, for example, is that over here under acquisition, it has something that refers to drop level 1. What this means is essentially this item is capable of being generated anywhere in the game because all area levels are 1 or greater. And so mostly items will sort of have a drop level that corresponds to their required level to be used. And you can see that here with a 2-stone ring. We have a drop level of 20, and it requires level 20 to be used. right? So typically this drop level will correspond to the required level to be used. If I go back in game here, you'll see this Jade Hatchet. It has a requirement of level 6 to use, and if we were to go look at the wiki, what you'll see is when we look this up in a new tab here, you'll see that the Jade Hatchet has a drop level of 6 right here. What this means effectively, or in practical terms, is that the items that are generated at the vendor are first based sort of on what drop level items you're capable of generating. And the drop level items that you're capable of generating at a vendor are always going to be one above your level. So if I'm at level 5, I'll generate drop level 6 items. And the item level of those of those items that I generate will always be item level 6. So
stay sharp.
As a result of this, we want to pay attention to the drop level of items rather than the required sort of like level to use an item, because that's going to more accurately reflect when an item can actually appear at the vendor. And the best sort of use cases or ways to explain this is as follows. Stone Axe here has no level requirement. And one of the frustrating things was back a few patches ago, now I was trying to level a Marauder and I wanted to buy a Stone Axe right away once I got into town after killing Hillock and being level 2. But they never showed up at the vendor. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? Well, that's the sort of the impetus that made me understand what the vendor system actually does and how it generates items. Because if you look, you'll see that it has a drop level of 4. As a result of this, you're level 2 when you come into town after killing Hillock, if that's the only thing you do in the Twilight Strand. And you're capable of generating drop level 3 items from the vendor, but you're not capable of dropping drop level 4 items. As a result of this, you'll never see a Stone Axe. This also explains why you never see coral rings at Nessa, because they have a drop level 4, even though you can use them right off the bat with no level requirement. You might be more familiar with the attribute amulets in this issue with drop level. All attribute amulets, like the ones that just give flat of 1 stat, like dexterity, strength, intelligence, have a gear requirement level of 5. However, if you check the vendor at level 4, if you check the vendor at level 5, you will never see them at Nessa because they have a drop level of 7. As a result of this, your character needs to be at least level 6 before they'll start appearing at the vendor. You can see here that nothing's here as it relates to those basic attribute amulets, and I'm level 5.
God hasn't abandoned
If
us.
I go level up to level 6 from the Submerged Passage, which we'll do real quick, you'll see that when I return to town, those items will actually be there. If she rolls them for me, which she may or may not. Hopefully she does. So as we look at this, this is why sometimes you can get really sort of inconsistent results from the vendors. If you're trying to go and buy an item from a vendor because you have like the required level, but the required level is not the important thing. What's the important thing is the drop level. So you'll see here, I can indeed see these attribute amulets, and they only appeared once I hit level 6, and that is because what's generated at the vendor are drop level items that are 1 level higher than your character. As a result of this, I can see these basic attribute amulets like the Jade Amulet and the Lapis Amulet. So some other use cases for this are as follows. With the level 8 belts, like the heavy belt or leather belt, these have a drop level of 10. As a result of this, you can't actually see these items until you're level 9. This is somewhat annoying because the item only requires level 8 to use itself. This has affected how I path, certainly, sometimes, especially as it relates to Ranger. Because with Ranger, I want to equip War Banner, but Ranger doesn't have enough base attributes to equip War Banner by itself. And so you either need a Amber Amulet or a Heavy Belt or stuff on the tree. I don't typically like buying attribute amulets because they require a transmute, and I don't always have a transmute to spare. But the level 8 belts require 2 Wisdom Scrolls for a normal version, and typically I have that. So one issue that came up with me was that I would go back to town at level 8 a lot and look for a heavy belt and be like, well, what the hell's going on here? I don't see it at the vendor, and I'm not going to see it unless I'm level 9. As a result of this, it's actually changed how I path a little bit with Ranger. And what I mean by that is if I want War Banner before Brutus, which I typically do, I will actually go and pick up Primal Spirit right away to be able to equip War Banner to help with Brutus. So that is one example of that. The final sort of set of examples we'll talk about with the item level stuff results is from like how many sockets are available. So it's important to know as a runner that 4 sockets don't start appearing until you are capable of generating drop level 25 items. As a result of that, that means that at level 24, you can start checking the vendor for 4 socket items. And the reason why we care about sockets is that anything that has 4 sockets is going to be capable of being 4 linked or might be 4 linked from the vendor as we look at it. Other important breakpoints to know is that 5 sockets have a drop level 35. Typically, we don't check vendors for 5 sockets in speed leveling, but they might be there. And then likewise, 6 sockets have a drop level of 50, so that means at character level 49, you might be able to find a 6 socket from the vendor. We don't typically check for that, but it might be there, and that might be useful in certain cases. So, in summary, that is how items are generated at the vendor, and the 2 important things to remember is that the items that are generated depend on your character level. What will be generated will be 1 level above your character level to a cap. And secondly, what matters in terms of the items that are capable of being generated is the drop level. And drop level is not a stat that is visible in game, and you have to use an external resource to know what the drop level of an item is. However, I will say that typically most items will correspond to their required level. So that is, if an item has a required level of 20, it will also have a drop level of 20. But there are certain notable exceptions, like the basic attribute amulets and the level 8 belts and some weapons. So hopefully this has helped, and take care.